Ready first, always win. This is Major Pat Lavin from the 16th Brigade Engineer Battalion, Catamount 3. This video will discuss the Combined Arms Breach. I will briefly discuss the tenets of breaching and reverse breach planning. I'll highlight some key points for consideration as we develop SOPs and move toward collective execution of the Combined Arms Breach. I'll use the tenets of breaching to guide our discussion. They are intelligence, breaching fundamentals, breaching organization, mass, and synchronization. First, we'll discuss intelligence. We don't want to stumble into the obstacle in the dark. A successful breach is a deliberate operation. We need to know where the obstacle is, what its composition is, and what bypasses may be available. At the brigade and battalion level, it is important to consider if bypassing obstacles is a wise choice. In some cases, bypasses may be possible, but it may result in piecemeal commitment of forces to the objective, and therefore prevent us from achieving the mass necessary to win. Finally, we should carefully consider how we shape the attack in the deep fight. If we can find and kill the enemy engineers before they have the opportunity to emplace deep and complex obstacles, we will greatly increase our chance for success. Enemy mine layers and engineer forces should be near the top of the HPTL. Breach organization. The breaching task force should be organized into three main elements: the breach force, support force, and assault force. The breach force is further divided into the reduction element and the security element. The breach force should not be the engineer battalion or company. The breach force should typically be a maneuver company headquarters, task organized with a reduction element and a security element. The reduction element will typically be an engineer platoon or two platoons depending on the number of lanes required. The security element should be a combination of tanks and mounted infantry. If we task the sappers with security, we are sacrificing the efficiency and effectiveness of the reduction effort and increasing the risk to mission. The support force will typically be a tank-heavy team. The assault force may be tank or infantry-heavy depending on the mission variables. If possible, we will task organize a sapper platoon or squad with the assault force to help them deal with protective obstacles on the objective. Next, the breaching fundamentals, SOSA. Suppress, obscure, secure, reduce, and assault. The fundamentals align clearly with the breach organizations. Suppress is the primary responsibility of the support force. Obscuration is controlled by the support force, with the breach force providing supplemental obscuration in the reduction area. During planning, we must identify who controls obscuration and how much is available. We must ensure that the obscuration plan is synchronized with the breach force's maneuver to the reduction area. Secure is the responsibility of the breach force's security element. Reduce falls to the engineers that compose the reduction element. And finally, assault is the responsibility of the assault force. Mass. This will be one of our biggest challenges. To succeed, the breaching task force must commit overwhelming combat power to a very narrow point of breach. In our example, let's assume that this corridor is about 5 kilometers wide. The reduction area in this terrain will probably be only about 1 kilometer wide, with lanes spaced 500 to 800 meters apart. We need to put the entire task force, and likely most of the brigade combat team, through 2 lanes, the total of which is only about 35 meters wide. The challenge is to avoid concentrating our forces until they arrive in the reduction area. We must remain dispersed until the last possible moment to increase survivability and mitigate the enemy's superiority in fires, and to avoid telegraphing the point of breach. In this scenario, we might use different avenues of approach for the breach and support forces, with the assault force following sufficiently far behind the breach force to avoid giving away the plan, but not too far behind that they arrive too late. We must also consider how we can leverage deception, electronic, and cyber warfare to obscure the breach and assault force, mask the location of our breach assets and the reduction area, and suppress the enemy's ability to deliver direct and indirect fires on the reduction area. Finally, synchronization is probably the most critical of the tenets. If everything else goes right, but the assault force is out of sync with the breach force, the operation will fail. The enemy will have an opportunity to close the lane if they're late, and they'll have an opportunity to destroy them with fires if they're early. The task force command post's primary responsibility is this synchronization. The key to success is through rehearsals. The task force should prioritize the rehearsal of SOSA, suppress, obscure, secure, and assault. Typically, the engineers will be thoroughly rehearsed at reduction, and this step is the least complex of the whole operation. I'll now briefly discuss reverse breach planning. First, I'll discuss our available reduction assets. In the BEB, we have 9 sapper squads, mounted in Bradley fighting vehicles, 6 assault breacher vehicles, and 4 armored vehicle launch bridges. We no longer have any armored combat earth movers, ACEs. Although our D7s could be used in extremis, it's not recommended as they are not armored and they can't keep up with a mechanized force. Successful breaching will also require the use of the maneuver battalion's tank plows and rollers. By MTO, each maneuver battalion is authorized 1 roller and 3 mine-clearing blades per armor company. Next, we will template the obstacles. As you'll see in a moment, one of the challenges we face is dealing with successive obstacles. In this case, we'll template the enemy defending with a simple battle position in the battle zone and a C-stop forward in the disruption zone. We will need to breach or bypass the disruption obstacles, and then breach the main tactical obstacle belt. Then breach the protective obstacles. Step 3 is to understand the scheme of movement and maneuver. We need to make sure that the breach plan supports the maneuver plan. Now we'll need to identify the number of lanes. In general, we need 1 lane for a company-sized assault, and 2 for a battalion-sized task force. We'll also need 1 footpath for each dismounted assaulting platoon. It's important to note that a sapper platoon contains everything required to establish a footpath, including redundancy. Now we match assets to lanes using the reduce, proof, mark, and redundancy model. This ensures that we build in the 50% redundancy required to succeed. It's also important to note here that we only use assets once. Although an ABV can reduce, proof, and mark, we only plan for it to execute one of those tasks, usually reduction. This is where having the tanks and the breach force with mine-clearing blades and rollers is critical. We'll typically plan for them to proof lanes. This also helps establish farside security quickly. In this video, I've discussed the breaching tenets, fundamentals, and reverse breach planning. I strongly recommend that you watch the TRADOC Sim Center's video on the Combined Arms Breach for a better visualization of the Combined Arms Breach. You can also reference FM 3-90-1 and ATP 3-90.4. Before I go, I'll leave you with a few final things to think about. During planning and the development of SOPs, we must consider exactly who owns certain key tasks. Who determines that conditions are set to commit the breach force? Who has the authority to commit cyber and EW assets to the breach? Who owns the decision to continue or finish proofing lanes? Is there an engineer reserve, and if there is, who controls it? Once again, I'm Major Pat Lavin from 16th BEB. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or my team. Ready first, always win, always on top.